By the release of Silent Hill 3, Team Silent had no doubt made a name for themselves within the industry. With the first two games of the series being so successful, Team Silent's next outing was going to be a very anticipated title, and many people in the industry were looking forward to seeing what Team Silent was going to cook up next. Unlike Silent Hill 2, which told a completely separate story from the original, Silent Hill 3 would go on to follow the events of the first game and tie up some loose ends. I think gameplay-wise, Silent Hill 2 is a much more solid game. It takes a lot of improvements it made from Silent Hill 2 and attempts to perfect them even more. However, I think out of all three games, the story is the weakest, and we'll talk about this later on in the review. This, by many, is also considered to be the last great Silent Hill game. I guess we're going to find out as I'm about to start Silent Hill 4. It's kind of sad too, because this seems to be the entry that Konami would be typical modern day Konami and really start getting involved in development and mandating a lot of things, taking away from a lot of the creativity that Team Silent had in the first two titles. Still, despite all the meddling, Team Silent was still able to craft a game worth playing. How does this game hold up over the past two entries though? Is it worth playing today? Well, sit back, relax, subscribe to the channel as we review Silent Hill 3.
Don't touch that dial now, we're just getting started.
Silent Hill 3, when it comes to its story, is very hard to review because I can see what Team Silent was going for here, a direct follow-up to the events of Silent Hill. They really wanted to go in and tie up the loose ends that were left from Harry's story back in the first Silent Hill game. However, by doing so, I feel like that they limited themselves in being able to explore the character's psyche even more, and really focus in on some of those darker events that could have come out of the story had they tried to tell a more unique concept. Still, you can't judge the game for not taking it into that direction though, because that wasn't what the game was ever intended to be. Silent Hill 3's characters, or its supporting characters, may not be the best that the series has had and may not have those same strong points that the original had, as they're just kind of there to support Heather. But Heather really is the star of this game. Heather is a very great character I found very enjoyable to play, and I really liked her personality. She kind of has that teen angst, rebellious kind of side to her, but yet there's this clear love and devotion that she has for her father. There's a lot of confusion. Being able to kind of examine some of the items will give you little tidbits of her personality as to what she kind of thinks about the environments and things. It's really, really cool. So let's talk a little bit about its story. Silent Hill 3 was a direct follow-up to Silent Hill, following the events that preceded the cult and what would happen to the infant that Harry Mason received at the end of the first game. The game starts out with Heather Mason having a nightmare where she's clearly in Silent Hill's amusement park. This serves as a tutorial of the game and kind of gets you used to some of the controls. After waking up from a nightmare, she decides to leave the cafe. It is here we meet up with a private detective whom says somebody wants to talk to her. She escapes him by hiding in the bathroom and crawls out the window. Heather starts to see monsters affect the real world, meets with Claudia, who wants her to return to Silent Hill and finish what was started 17 years ago. Heather eventually ends up in the other world, and without spoiling too much, these would lead her back to the events that would take her back into Silent Hill. While I found the story very good and intriguing and enough to keep me pressing forward, I found the pacing of this story a bit too fast. You have a bad afternoon and then end up going to Silent Hill after some events take place. Still, despite that rather small complaint, I really did enjoy this game's story and its subtle connections between the original and its small references to Silent Hill 2. There are some otherworld monster designs, much like Silent Hill 2, but it isn't as subtle or focused on nearly as much as it was in James's story, so there really isn't a lot to analyze here, and that's okay. This game really was meant to be nothing more than a sequel to the original game, and I respect it for that. The characters this time around really aren't that standout. The villains feel pretty generic, and the other characters surrounding Heather do too. They really don't add too much to the story. Heather herself, though, is an excellent character. Her character is fleshed out and has such a great personality. A bit rebellious, she very much feels like a teenager despite what's happening to her, and that shows, and I love it. Something else I'd like to add to the story segment is the town of Silent Hill itself. For being a Silent Hill title, you sure don't spend much time in Silent Hill. As a matter of fact, most of the game has you exploring outside of Silent Hill in a different city. It is only through Heather's connection to Silent Hill and the environments the monsters of Silent Hill appear in the first place. Though, as I stated, you will return to Silent Hill much later in the game. I won't say Silent Hill has always been about the gameplay, because it hasn't. Like most survival horror games back in the day, the gameplay was kind of second nature to the story. The gameplay was more or less trying to make you feel like you were constrained and playing as a normal person, or make you feel like, you're just needing to survive. The gameplay has never been front and center. There are definitely some things, though, that Silent Hill has come along and done that refine the gameplay in ways, and I want to talk a little bit about those. The gameplay keeps in line with what the series has been known for at this point. Tank controls still exist, and they are the best that the series has seen so far. The combat feels more refined and addresses some of the complaints that I had about Silent Hill 2. The dog enemies are outright annoying, but giving them a piece of beef jerky was a nice touch to distract them and get past them. Another nice little touch the game did was divide up the menu, separating weapons and supplies, making it much easier to navigate the items rather than having them all clumped together like they were in the previous games. I've heard some complain that this feels too much like an action game rather than a survival horror game, but I'm just not feeling that criticism. This is first and foremost a survival horror game at its core. The arguments of this is finding a submachine gun instead of a rifle and finding a katana. I do get finding the katana, as it makes sense that someone in an office building may have a sword like that on display, but I do get the criticism, at least towards the submachine gun. It does feel a bit out of place and something that would feel like it belongs in a Resident Evil title rather than Silent Hill, as Silent Hill has almost always had weapons that feel more like everyday objects that your everyman would have, rather than, say, something you might find in a police locker or something that'd be accessed like military grade. The melee weapons this time around have a bit more added range and use. For instance, the katana swings a lot faster but does more damage, but has a shorter range, whereas the steel pipe has a longer range but does less damage. The puzzles felt a bit more difficult this time around and required some thinking in how to use your tools. One such puzzle had me connecting a chain to a gate and then using an amusement ride to connect it to, only to turn that amusement ride on and pull the stuck gate open so I could get into the next area. I really enjoyed the combat this time around. Something I criticized Silent Hill 2 for was far too much ammo towards the end of the game. This game took it to an extreme. I had so many healing items and ammo I didn't even know what to use it on. Even after killing the final boss, I was shocked to find out how much I still had. It kind of defeated the purpose of a survival feeling survival horror games are known for. Let's get into some strengths and weaknesses that I didn't quite get covered within the story and the gameplay sections. Let's talk a little bit about its soundtrack. I went on to praise Silent Hill 2's soundtrack for being one of the best in gaming, and I do like the soundtrack to 3, but I enjoyed the piano-based music from Silent Hill 2 more. That doesn't mean that the guitar pieces and the return to industrial sounds are bad though, as I found the guitar tunes very well done, and I really did like the sound that Akira was going for. However, I did prefer those melodic piano sounds because they just seemed so much more memorable. And the industrial sounds definitely do add to the ambient nature of the game, making it slightly more creepy. I say slightly because I really didn't find Silent Hill 3 creepy at all. I still think the first game is by far the creepiest of the 3 that I've played so far. A nice little nod to the first game was a small notepad scattered across Silent Hill. These were the very notepads Harry used to save the game back in the very first Silent Hill game. Examining them will let Heather read what Harry wrote all those years ago, usually focusing on Cheryl or some weird stuff Harry saw back in Silent Hill. But it was a nice little touch that gives the players who have played through the first game a bit more of a glance into Harry's character and what he was thinking at the time. There's also references, if you look scattered about, referring back to Silent Hill 2. Something I criticized Silent Hill 2 for was not being able to explore Silent Hill more. Silent Hill 3 explores even less of Silent Hill, albeit a little bit of places you go to visit in Silent Hill 2. It was cool being able to revisit Brookhaven Hospital from Silent Hill 2. It would have made more sense, since this being a continuation of Silent Hill's story, to let the player revisit Alchemelia Hospital, since it had more to do with the first game's plot. I feel this was done because the assets were already created with a PS2 environment. It was easy to copy-paste those assets and reuse them rather than trying to recreate Alchemelia Hospital. Adding what I did about Harry's notes, I think it would have been a very nice touch to even get further detail into Harry's adventures. On a side note though, Brookhaven Hospital was a shot-for-shot recreation of the original from Silent Hill 2. This made navigating it super easy since I was familiar with it, but also made for a very nice callback to Silent Hill 2. Overall, I enjoyed Silent Hill 3, and while I had my problems with its pacing of the story, I still found quite a bit of enjoyment out of this game. The gameplay was tight, responsive, and challenged me in ways that I wasn't expecting. I can definitely recommend this game, especially if you've played the first two games. I really think there's a lot to enjoy here. For newcomers, I think playing this as the first game is going to leave you a little bit confused when it comes to its story, but it is still an enjoyable game even without that knowledge. I have no problem giving this my Gaming with Spoons seal of approval. Silent Hill 3 is a very solid game, and I really enjoyed my time being able to play this game. I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I did Silent Hill 2, as I found the story in Silent Hill 2 to be a lot more thought-provoking, and there's clearly a lot more there to analyze. Silent Hill 3 filled that itch of a horror game and tied up some of the loose ends that Silent Hill had, but when it came to its characters and its story, it just really felt like a rehash of the original. Despite that all, I really did enjoy Heather as a character, and that was one of the main things that pushed me through, being able to see these events to the end. Silent Hill 3 also has some very heart-wrenching and memorable scenes, which I will not spoil here, but it's definitely a game that I enjoyed. That being said, this has been my Silent Hill 3 review. If you liked what you saw, consider hitting subscribe, giving this video a like as it does help out the channel, and subscribing for more reviews just like this one and gaming news. Most importantly guys, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoons is checking out.